So this begins our lecture on chapter 27, which is over the Islamic Empire. So as we're going through this, kind of consider some of the facets of empire and facets of imperialism, and think about how the Islamic empires kind of fit the bill of imperialism, especially the Ottomans. So here we go. So we're going to be looking at three empires: the Ottoman Empire, which would expand into the Balkans, which is that area north of Greece, the northern part of the Black Sea, Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, the Middle East, and Iraq, as well as the Nile River Valley and parts of North Africa. So the Ottoman Empire would control the Mediterranean, especially the Eastern Mediterranean, and be a world superpower. They kind of became the Byzantines of this period between 1500 and all the way up to 1919. It says 1500 to 1800. But the Ottoman Empire actually lasted for close to 700 years. We'll also look at the Safavid Empire, which is in modern-day Iran, which was a Shia empire, and it was kind of sandwiched in between the Ottomans, who were quite powerful, and the Mughal Empire, which was a kind of a descendant group of the Mongols that existed in India and had converted to Islam and kind of extended Islamic rule into India, and that's why you see a lot of Islam in this region today. So here we go. We're going to continue on. So the Ottoman Empire was led by Osman Bey, and Bey essentially means chief in Turkish, and he led a group of semi-nomadic Turks. So they practiced some farming, but they were mostly nomads, and as we see throughout history, nomads have enormous impact on the world. And he led them to become Ghazis, which were these zealous Muslim religious warriors. And it was essentially their duty to spread the territory of Islam. And there's a quote in your text on page 674 that says, "The Ghazi is the instrument of the religion of Allah. A servant scribed their ethos. The Ghazi is the instrument of the religion of Allah, a servant of God who purifies the earth from the filth of polytheism. The Ghazi is the sword of God. He is the protector and the refuge of the believers. If he becomes a martyr in the ways of God, do not believe that he has died. He lives in beatitude with Allah. He has eternal life." So essentially, he kind of had these, almost fanatic followers who would, through warfare, expand his territory as a chief, and they would become the Ottomans. Ottoman is kind of a anglicized version of that. So what they do is they would essentially take over Anatolia with the use of light cavalry and volunteer infantry, and they would eventually adopt armor onto their cavalry, because we're in 1289, we're early here. And they would begin to adopt armor as well. In the Balkans, they would force Christian families, and I'll show you a map of where the Balkans is, just going to remind you, forced Christian families to surrender young children. So as they conquered other areas that were predominantly Christian, they forced the people there to provide children for military service. And not only military service, but also service into political institutions. And this was a policy called devshirme. And what would essentially happen is they take these children and they would become loyal and fanatical Janissary corps. They had a reputation for being enormously loyal to the Sultan because they're taken at a very young age, extremely religious, outfitted with the best weapons, fed the best. I mean, they were well taken care of, but they were taken from their homes, and they were forced to convert to Islam, and they were forced to serve in the military of the Ottoman Empire. So here's where the Balkans is, and as you can see on the right, kind of the power base of the Ottoman Empire was in Turkey. So with its proximity to Greece and to the Balkan states, it had the ability to conquer and take from those places, almost like a tribute system. So here's an example of a visual example of devshirme for the Ottoman Empire. The children on the bottom are essentially being forced, and they would go into these villages every 3 or 4 years to take the children, about a few hundred of them from surrounding villages in the Balkans, and have them serve in the military. So this is one way that they kind of started to become very powerful. Well, Mehmed II, also known as the Conqueror, who ruled for about a period of 30 years. He would be responsible for sacking Constantinople. And this is the biggest, this is the kind of turning point for the Ottomans into becoming world superpowers. So they conquered Constantinople from the Byzantines in 1453. They caused a lot of trouble in that region, and they finally became the world power in the Mediterranean as a result of this. So they renamed the city Istanbul. The emperor Mehmed II considered himself the emperor of two lands, Europe and Asia, and in fact, and of two seas, Black Sea and Mediterranean. In fact, if you go to Constantinople today, or Istanbul as it is known now, it straddles. It's in two places. It's European, but it's also Asian. It's also Anatolian. It's very, very, very interesting. He also had a plan to eventually spread territory even into Italy and Rome and capture the Pope himself. But he actually captured some cities in Italy, but was unsuccessful in actually capturing the Pope. This is a very powerful empire. So here's an example of the siege of Constantinople. So 1453, we saw the fall of Constantinople into the hands of the Islamic world. And you see on the right, those are Orthodox Christian priests and probably royalty in Constantinople, probably a little worried that they're going to be ruled by kind of the warriors of Islam. So Suleyman the Magnificent, he would continue this policy of expansion into Asia and into Europe. And he actually halted Central Asian nomadic migration. So he began to prevent this movement into the Ottoman Empire from outside of it. He besieged Vienna in Austria in 1529. He expanded naval power, so they controlled the Mediterranean and Black Sea. He reformed taxes and laws in his city, and he also expanded educational services. All these empires focus on education of some sort because they need their bureaucracy well trained in order to successfully manage their empires. So the Safavid Empire was led by a young man, Ismail. He was a young military leader, ruled for about 23 years. He was orphaned. His parents were actually killed by enemies. So he kind of went off into hiding and essentially swore revenge against those who killed his parents. So he would return to his homeland, and he would essentially take and proclaim himself the official ruler, a Shah of all of Persia, and claim descendancy from the ancient kings. And he proclaimed that the official religion of the realm will be Twelver Shiism. And to kind of put it in a nutshell of what Twelver Shiism was and is it believed in 12 infallible imams or religious leaders that essentially there were 12 of them, beginning with the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law Ali, and that the 12th imam or hidden imam had got into hiding around 874 to escape persecution, especially by the Sunnis. And they actually believed he was still alive and that he would return to spread the true religion. And Ishmael's father had instructed Turkish followers to wear a distinctive red hat with 12 pleats in memory of the 12 Shiite imams, and they subsequently became known as Kizilbash or Redheads. They would change their religion quite often to kind of appeal to popular support. They would eventually settle on this one because this was popular with a lot of the Turks that were moving into the area after the Mongols had been defeated. So they used religion to unify their empire as well by blending kind of this Shiism with Turkish militancy and military mindedness. So they were quite apart from the Ottomans, who were Sunni. So there would be a big conflict between them and the Ottomans. They called it the Safavid Empire after Safi al-Din, who was, according to them, he traced his ancestry back to Ishmael. So they became the emerging power in Persia, in that region. So here's a pilgrimage site in Karbala. Um, that is in, I believe, modern-day Iran. So, but the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514, the Ottoman um, Salim the Grim attacked the Safavid. He used uh, Ottoman gunpowder technology, which essentially gave them the upper hand because Ismail and the Safavids didn't tend to use much gunpowder. So the Safavids were kind of weakened by this attack by the Ottomans. They were able to resist it, but it weakened their empire. So Shah Abbas the Great would revitalize the empire by reforming the administrative system, by expanding their military and modernizing their military, expanding trade, and thus expanding the empire as well. In fact, Shah Abbas the Great would utilize Europeans to help in his conflicts with the Ottomans. As it says in your text, in 678 he attacked and defeated the nomadic Uzbeks in Central Asia, expelled the Portuguese from Hormuz, and harassed the Ottomans mercilessly in a series of wars from 1603 to the end of his reign. So essentially these two empires fought for control of kind of the Mediterranean, Persian Gulf region. Quite a conflict between these two Muslim empires. So just because they had the same religion didn't mean they agreed on a lot of issues and didn't fight for territory. So Zahir al-Din Muhammad, Babur the Tiger, was a Turk, so he's from Central Asia. A lot of these nomadic groups are the ones who are going to cause trouble, as always. He invaded northern India essentially for plunder. So unlike the Safavids and the Ottomans, he wasn't concerned with religious zeal or promoting religion. He was just there to steal stuff. He was Muslim though, and he wanted to kind of revitalize and bring back the Mongol Empire. And that's what Mughal means. It's a Persian interpretation and way of saying Mongol. So he founded the Mughal dynasty, and he expanded through most of the Indian subcontinent, and they would through the 15th and 16th centuries. In fact, when he got there, he and his people were like, "This place sucks. This weather's awful. It's humid. It's nasty. Our horses don't have good places." But they decided to stay. And they would continue to stay and continue to expand their power. So the dream of creating a new Mongol Empire would actually kind of come true. So Akbar the Great, who was a grandson of Babur after Humayun, the second emperor, would be driven into exile. And he won power and prestige pretty much by inciting fear into his enemies. He actually threw Adam Khan, leader of his army, out the window twice just to make sure he was dead. So you didn't mess with Akbar the Great. No. And he created a centralized government in a region of historical decentralization. So India was consistently known as a region, except for like the Mauryan dynasty, of one of fragmentation. It was never really united under any group. Especially if you look at northern and southern India, very distinct cultures, and then each province of India, even today, it's very decentralized. A lot like Europe during the feudal period, or Japan during its feudal period in the Tokugawa era, or in Europe during the era of kind of before Charlemagne and after the fall of Rome. It's very decentralized, very fragmented. So he brought it together through consistent rule of the Mughal Empire. He retook control of India, destroyed the Hindu kingdom, and promoted, but even after destroying the Hindus, he promoted a religiously tolerant divine faith, so essentially a syncretic form of Islam and Hindu. And he essentially promoted the divine faith because his goal was to bring India together, to say, look, I'm your leader. I could care less what religion you are. You're essentially going to pledge your loyalty to me as your king, and I could care less what religion you are. He was a very well-learned man. He was intelligent. It says he might have been dyslexic, but he was well-learned and understood that if you want to rule a kingdom, you're going to have to promote stability in a very divisive country such as India. So we'll pick up in our next lecture.